So just to introduce our team that's with us here today, this corner of the city that they're going to talk about in their project that they've proposed has a fair amount of planning going on. The city released an updated plan for Moakley Park right next door that is in October and will require further work, but that's moving forward. UMass has been doing significant work on its campus, also right nearby. And the new Climate Ready Dorchester plan just released a few weeks ago includes this area in the northern reaches of its plan. This project sits at the intersection of all these plans and activity, as well as multiple transportation projects that are needed to more effectively move people around the region by multiple modes. Dorchester Bay City is also a place that has really remarkable and beautiful views of the waterfront. It has the potential to be a very welcoming and inclusive project, and it will contribute, if done well, to making this area more resilient to flooding and sea level rise as part of a whole set of solution strategies that the city has proposed along this area. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dick Galvin and Kirk Sykes to introduce the project and the rest of their team. Welcome this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bud. Thank you, Alice, and thank you, Kathy, and the Harbor Now staff for inviting us today and sharing our project and some of our ideas this morning. Presenting, Kirk and I will go through a couple of introductory slides, and then we'll turn it over to Lucinda Sanders and Dimo Storinos, both from Olin, who are world-class landscape architecture firm with years and years of experience in planning complex waterfront sites, and they'll walk you through the overall presentation as we go through this. Before we start, as a quick aside, I actually, through Vivian Lee, joined your board years ago. I think I was on it for about 20 minutes because it was right before the merger. So I'm a little bit familiar with the mission and the passion and dedication of all of you relative to the waterfront and its planning. And so it's a great honor for us to be here to present to you guys. So Dimo, do you want to go to the screen? Somebody make you a presenter? There you go.
Can you all see that?
Yeah, I think you can go full screen, right?
Yep. There you go.
Why don't you go back to the beginning?
Yeah.
So these guys will go through it, and Kirk and I will go through the first couple slides, Demo, so why don't we jump in? Real quick, this process for us started in 2017 when UMass Building Authority put out an RFI for the Bayside site. And so we've been heavily invested in it for 3 years now. We've had over 150 community and stakeholder meetings along the way. And our LOI was submitted in March. COVID delayed the real kickoff of the public process, which started in September. And since then, we've had quite a few public meetings that Bud referred to on a variety of topics associated with this project. And Alice and I have been talking about having this meeting for a while now, and it's great we could get it in 2020. Demo, next slide. So we'll talk about, in a big way, an overview of the project, resiliency and identity, and Demo will talk about what that means relative to this particular site and project. Okay, Demo. Kirk, go ahead. Why don't you jump in here?
Sure, thanks. And thank all of you. We're especially excited about the 25% of you that have been to 2 or more public meetings over the last few months, because we have been meeting every couple of weeks since September, talking about different aspects to the project. But just to put the project into context, basically these circumferential rings are 1 mile and 2 miles out from the center of the site. But this is intended to show you, how we understand this to be an important part of the open space network of Boston. Off to the left, you can see the Emerald Necklace leading to Boston's largest park, Franklin Park. But you can also see that the combination of Moakley plus Dorchester Bay City is really the prominent piece of open space on the water on the easternmost edge. And then the other intent here is just to show how we understand, in the context of the Harbor Walk, which is so expansive and amazing and maybe one of our greatest assets, that we are part of the most continuous and accessible sections of that Harbor Walk. There really aren't many that are served by mass transit in the way that JFK serves this site. And there also aren't a lot of portions of the Harbor Walk that are less disrupted, as you see in the South Boston Seaport section, where the piers go in and out. You can't frequently see from one edge to the other as you can from Pleasure Bay all the way down over Carson Beach to the peninsula. Let's go to the next slide. So the site is a combination of two sites. As Dick said, we basically earned the opportunity to help improve the Bayside site, former Bayside Exposition Center. And then sometime later, we actually engaged in the purchase of 2 Morrissey, which is the Santander site, where Santander will remain for many years and has a number of options, but we've engaged in a master planning exercise to think about both of these sites together and how they engage Morrissey, Mount Vernon, and then collectively how they can benefit the harbor, the water's edge, and the open space network, including Moakley and Carson. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, Dick, do you want to do this one?
Yeah. So this is the site plan that we've been working with for the last year or so. And you can see the buildings laid out here. And it gives you a snapshot of the open space that Demo will talk about in a moment. This is a mixed use project. It has always been envisioned to be such. We're really focused on creating a great and welcoming and inclusive place. It's largely commercial. It's about 25% residential, 1,740 units. And the overall site encompasses 34 acres, which, that's as large a site as you can come by in the city and still be within the city confines of Boston. And it's just under 6 million square feet, which equates to a 4 FAR on those 34 acres. Next slide. So I think at this point, Kirk, we can kind of turn this over to Demo, and he and Cindy can walk through the overall strategy as it relates to how we connect with the water, our open spaces, and resiliency.
Great.
Yeah, I'll hand this over to Cindy.
Yep. Thank you very much, Dick and Kirk. And thank you to Bud and Alice and the Boston Harbor Now team and the forum attendees. So we really want to talk about this social and physical context that this site sits in. Obviously, the water is beloved today. And it's the intention of this project to keep it beloved for everybody. And as Bud has said, this idea that it is accessible and resilient for everybody, not just for one person, but for everyone, that it's welcoming and inclusive, is very much embodied in the scheme that we've prepared. So next, please. Of course, it's not just the water, but the surrounding parks are incredibly important. So many activities go on in those parks. It's absolutely our intention to be thinking about the public spaces within the Dorchester Bay City site to include and continue as much of these activities as possible, such as the summer camp programs. This site sits in a context with residents, and there will be new residents here. The idea is that this is a seamless connection between the community and this site. We imagine many programs spilling into our site, including food festivals and barbecues. The ultimate architecture and the way it's articulated will be another way of integrating the existing community with this new community. Next. We already have a fantastic population of students. And it's our intention to facilitate those connections through enhanced and new bicycle networks. Already Dick and Kirk are very engaged in internship programs such as CREST, and their intention is to continue those, further integrating the site and the community. Next. And of course, there are many people who will be coming here to work. It's the idea of this plan that aspect is visible. Gone are the days of coming into an office building with a plaza and going up to the 20th floor. Really, this is about visibility of that ground floor activity and the community involvement in that ground floor, either in the form of retail or interior public spaces. Next. Visitors are another component. We see this site as an important place where people will want to come for a whole host of activities, including some of the activities that already go on in the surrounding neighborhoods, such as the Caribbean Day Parade. We imagine opportunities for art, for cultural entertainment. So there will be plenty of opportunities for people to really, will become a destination is really what we're talking about, a new destination. Next. So how did we think about the site? How did we curate it? What were some of the elements that were important? The views were very much in our mind, and the views of the water. These long views are so important to the north, the skyline, to the east, the bay, the Blue Hills. These are all important, and these were all considered in the layout of our plan. But we also have these near views as we focus in on the immediate waterfront, from everything from Carson Beach to Pleasure Bay. And we're seeing kind of the intimacy is in spite of all the vastness of the water, we're seeing the intimacy of places that people inhabit and move through and are very important to the community. And it's our desire to celebrate that. Next. So this actually led to the overall structure of this site. That the bay became kind of one of the primary elements, and all of the circulation patterns are really designed to embrace the bay. And underpinning this idea of the bay, as Kirk has talked about next, is the idea of the T to the C. What an incredible location, what an incredible opportunity to have public transit in a place that is so close to the sea. I mean, it's one of these things, we know the site is a sea of asphalt today. Nobody can really move through it and get to the waterfront. And this project really is opening up that opportunity. Next. This led to the overall armature of the site. It's something we call the fingers. And these fingers, which we'll talk about after Demo presents the idea of resilience, these fingers are really about creating many different kinds of public space that are available to everybody, but have something for everyone. They're not the same. They have their identity. They're meant to be an orienting element as a way to get to the waterfront. So this idea that everything is different, the boardwalk is different from the draw, different from the neighborhood corridor. These will become these elements where, meet me on the boardwalk or meet me at the draw, will become identifiable ways to get to the waterfront. Next. Demo.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, everyone. So, this idea of resiliency is obviously very prominent at this moment in time and will be into the future. And one of the many considerations that we have for this design isn't only what can exist today, but what can exist 50 years, 100 years from now. And understanding that we are dealing with dynamics of climate change and sea level rise, and that we plan for these things accordingly. So in our scheme, we needed to understand where we sit. And here, these two images show where we are within the floodplain and what our mapping is that shares, what that underlying flood risk is in our site and how we respond to that today and then into the future. So looking at our overall project site, and this, and specifically, this is outlining the Bayside site in and of itself, but also extends to Morrissey. That current conditions on the left, as we are today, mean high water comes about an elevation of 10.8, and the 100-year flood, as outlined in the orange below, comes up to about a 16-foot elevation. Knowing that if we were to deal with the site such as it is today, we'd be fine. But knowing that in 2070, sea level rise will come up virtually about 3 feet, give or take, and that our 100-year flood risk is in the orange out here, brings us up to an elevation of 19.5. Given current measures from the city of Boston and the BPDA that we've been working with, we know that we have to meet that 19.5 elevation, but also 24 inches of freeboard for buildings that have to sit on it. So we've devised this idea of a plateau on our site, on both sites, in fact, to raise the buildings, but then provide a gentle grade that connects down to the harbor walk and the areas beyond. The areas you see here in orange are really meant to really show the extent of the work that we're doing. Our site obviously is outlined here in the magenta, but in order to make this a meaningful transition and one that doesn't create barriers or walls to the water, but actually smooths the grade on all sides, we extending some of our work, and we're working with DCR on how we create these connections of coastal resiliency, and also with Boston City Parks and the Moakley Park team as to how we create this connection across Carson Beach as well. And this is just really a jurisdictional map for us to see all the different players and people that we are coordinating with on all sides of the project, and how, with each one of these entities, we're really striving to ensure that what we create is a sensitive and smart design that protects them and also the broader Dorchester area and South Boston. What we're also aware of course, are the larger efforts, such as Climate Ready Dorchester and where our piece sits. So, our site outlined in the magenta here is part of a much larger system and network that extends throughout the entire waterfront. Here, as we spoke before, connecting to the Moakley Park folks below, and then how our piece connects to Harbor Point are all ongoing conversations that we're having currently. This is, courtesy of Boston City Parks, some of the ideas, not only in resiliency that we're connecting with the Moakley Park team, but also ideas of program and ideas of circulation and connection through here. And it's been an ongoing and fruitful conversation to really create a dynamic waterfront that feels seamless, public, and open, while at the same time resilient and protects the waterfront. Another idea and thought that we have is not just looking at this from a grading and landform perspective, but also what does resiliency mean in terms of ecology and understanding where we sit in the world ecologically. That we sit in the lower Boston Basin, which is within a much larger region of the eastern temperate forest. And the idea we have is that we are starting to build in resiliency in materials and in planting and other ideas. So below what you see here is really an abstracted concept of what it means to move from the water up into what typically would be an upland forest, and translating that onto our site and what that means as we create this transect and cross section up through here, that you have this not just um, plantings, but there's a mood and feel that as you move out towards the water, the materiality of the project changes, and also the appropriate types of ecologies and plantings go in place that are meant to be out towards the water's edge that don't exist there today. And this is an example of a project Olin recently completed in New York. This is Pier 26 at Hudson River Park, where we took a very similar idea and applied it to an urban setting where there is a transect that starts out from a woodland and then makes its way down all the way virtually into the water. We actually built an ecological deck that responds to tide and actually has tidal appropriate plantings. So we know how to do this, and we expected to do something very similar here at Dorchester Bay City. This is just taking another look at how we would deploy those different ecologies and ideas across the waterfront. So looking out in the blue here is a coastal type planting and ecology into a maritime scrub, something very similar to more of a grassy dunish type of planting, and then all the way up through the transitional zones in the woodlands that you would see throughout the site. Coupled with a lot of the resiliency that we're talking about at a much broader scale, there's also the idea of proposed stormwater management and how we intend to capture water on site. So while it's not purely about sea level rise and the water coming from the bay, but it's also the water that lands on the site due to rainfall. So our goals here, are fairly broad and basic, but there for and the details of which we're working through. But most importantly is that we are going to be reducing the impervious cover by greening this site. We will be designing on-site stormwater management and an infrastructure that captures 100% of the water, infiltrates to the 1¼ inch depth. It mitigates the peak rates of volumes of runoff. It increases the quality of that stormwater, and then it meets or exceeds the Mass DEP stormwater management standards and the BWSC regulations. And those are our goals, and we certainly will strive to make that work. So I'm going to transition it back to Cindy to talk about the identity of the waterfront.
Great, thank you, Dimo. So I already spoke about the importance of each of these spaces having its own identity, yet Dimo did a really excellent job in introducing this idea that there are elements that hold these places together. So while they have their own identity, vegetation becomes an important bit of glue, if you will, to the entirety of the site. But we've named each one of these spaces because we think it's important to understand their own identity. And we'll just walk through each one of these. I will start out at the waterfront, and Dimo will pick up describing the other spaces. Next, right. So we are looking west now with Moakley Park off to our right. And I would say that there are a couple of really, really important guidelines that we have adhered to, one of which is absolutely to honor the DCR land, but not to separate it, to connect to make seamless connections. The other one is to embrace the presence of Moakley Park. We've had the opportunity to meet with my friend Chris Reed and his team from Stoss, as well as Boston City Parks, to begin that coordination effort. And Dick and his team are in conversation with the folks from Harbor Point. So we recognize that this site connects in really, really important ways, and that not only is this about people in Dorchester Bay City being able to get to the water, but people who are along the waterfront coming into Dorchester Bay City. So it works both ways. And we think that's an important concept that we have embraced. Next. So these are some precedent ideas. We have this notion of a porch up closer to the buildings where people can sit and look out over the water. And we also have this notion that as you move to the water, as Demo described in ideas of the vegetation, that the vegetation really reflects and respects where it is today. It doesn't quite do that very well today. I think you hopefully would all agree. And so really creating a strong sense of place, a seamless, strong sense of place, underlies the ideas of this project. Next. As we've all said before, the property does have a property line, but it's our goal to not make that line visible. The idea that, as I've described, a porch up closer to the buildings, but this very rich native landscape moving to the east, and actually coming into the property line. It's, you know, again, it's our desire to make these two entities quite seamless. And Demo also indicated all of the different constituencies that are surrounding the site, which we have to and are collaborating with and working with to make a better waterfront. Next. This is just a section, one of many sections that we cut. And what this is really designed to demonstrate, it's cut through the sort of northeasternmost building, what we call Building A. And we've talked about the elevation at 21.5, but you see us sloping down to the waterfront in a very seamless fashion. Again, you can see where we've indicated the property line, but the goal is to not even know it's there. And I don't think I've ever said this to Dick and Kirk, but I have this view of developers that when they make spaces in the public realm and make them seamless, they are some of the best developers in the world. Anyway, that's a plug for them and their approach and attitude. Next. And again, this is just a character sketch of what we imagine as we move northward to that Carson Beach connection and the waterfront. And so one of the things that we know that's really important about Moakley is the active recreation. And so what might be in what we're calling a possible extension of the plateau, what might happen there? This possibility of more intimate spaces, this idea of a public recreation, possibly beach volleyball. And it's such an important place to sit and look out over the water. So those are some of our early ideas. Next. And these are depicted in some of these sketches. So this is the idea, this sketch is the idea of a plateau that we could make here. And looking over Carson Beach to the site, we can see an idea of sort of a small stepped amphitheater, the possibility of beach volleyball, and play space for children of different ages next. This other idea is one that we call a ridge. It's just a narrower plateau. But again, what we're thinking about here is really the sort of prominence of this site and its position in the landscape overlooking Carson Beach next. So I'd like to turn it over to Dimo to walk you through the other spaces now.
Thank you, Cindy. So getting into some of the other open spaces or fingers, as we call them, each one, as Cindy described, is their own experience, and they have within them their own character and their own considerations. And so the draw is a very important one. This is the one that connects Dorchester Bay City to Harbor Point to the south. And how do we create that neighborly space between the two, where both communities can come together and use this as in a collective way, both socially and also as a series of connection points. So as you see here, these are some of the ideas that we've put together about creating those connections, ideas like dog runs and other more family-oriented spaces that we can put in there as we think about its program. But also, most importantly, as you can see below, it also is a very intentional bicycle route that brings you from Mount Vernon Street out to the Harbor Walk. And we want to make sure that we maintain that through here. So in plan, as you can see, what's really important for us in the yellow is that we create that connection and that bike route, but also we leave ourselves ample room to create that sort of that pocket park that brings the two communities together with a variety of activities and programs that we can put in there. And this is, again, part of an ongoing conversation with the residents of Harbor Point to see what they would like to see there and how we can make that work on both ends. Very quickly, because grading is so important, because we are, as an underlay, we are talking about, how we are raising the site. This section here is looking eastward, is cut north to south. And as you can see, here's our property line. To the right is the Harbor Point buildings, and to the left would be Dorchester Bay City. And again, we're mediating a very slight slope, and we're trying to essentially erase the idea of us being higher or lower, but actually giving ourselves a wide berth here for this public open space, where we're dropping the grade, about 18 inches to 2 feet, depending where we are, but that we have ample room for these public open and green spaces that both communities can enjoy. The portal. The portal is a very interesting concept to us and one that we're very fascinated by. It is a purely pedestrian experience within the Dorchester Bay City site, and also one that is, think of more of a narrow back alley muse type of space where, people can really apply, their own sensibilities to. I think what is really fascinating about what the portal is that it's a space where you can get a coffee, but also, it can transform itself into an outdoor exhibit and other sort of cultural applications to the site. What it terminates in at the end out towards the water is a winter garden. And we're very, even in Philadelphia, it doesn't get as cold as Boston, but we are aware of the seasonality that exists here and creating an indoor public space, that people can enjoy and walk in. So your journey would come through each one of these buildings, starting out at the further avenue and take you out towards the waterfront. The neighborhood corridor. Again, this is really a space where, we're looking for room for things like playgrounds and other family-oriented spaces and community rooms where people can gather informally within Dorchester Bay City. But again, this is still oriented as a journey towards the water. So back here between buildings I and J, we have this sort of community room space that people can use. And then along here, this large triangle wedge is where we would have a playground type of activity that really nods and connects to the kind of active recreational uses that you see happening towards Moakley Park and our Carson Beach connection. So that brings that kind of activity into the site. And then finally, the boardwalk. Really our main stem and spine through the Bayside site, which is really a mix of, it's a multimodal street really with active retail uses on the side, leveraged by wide green open spaces that people can use. As you can see here, the lawn on D is a very prominent precedent and very much present in our minds in this idea. But the point being is, as you make your way further to the east out towards the water, the dynamics of this space change from a more urbanized multimodal condition to one that becomes far more green and really kind of leaves the city behind and takes you out towards the water in a very gradual procession. This is just a quick perspective view of sort of the ideas that we're thinking of and the components that we have in here. Really giving height and prominence to pedestrians and bicyclists who would be coming through here, and really minimizing what vehicular impacts on here, but also providing the variety of spaces and places for people to engage while having these active retail edges that really enhance the publicness of this space and its sociability. So this is really one last view of our overall plan. A lot of the same ideas and sentiments we have are built in the Two More East site as well, but we wanted to really focus on getting you out to the water and our contribution really to the waterfront overall. And we wanted to thank you all this morning for joining us.
Thanks, Timo and Cindy. And before we open it up to questions, I think Kirk and I just want to emphasize the notion that, plans are great and all the physical work that we want to do here, but in order to make it truly feel open and welcoming to all, we have to be very intentional about programming. You saw the references to art and events and things like that we think will help that. Some of that has to do with how we program the retail, make a lot of our ground floor spaces, as part of Chapter 91, our FPA spaces, affordable to local restaurateurs and businesses, how we activate some of the civic spaces that we're thinking about, even down to signage, and how we make sure people know where these elements are and the identity that these guys spoke about. So we are very mindful and intentional about how we try to pull this off and make sure it is open to everyone, as we've talked about, but also feels open and is welcoming. So Kirk, do you want to just close on that with anything else?
No, I think you hit on it. And sorry, the noise. Perfect. I think it's spot on.
All right, Bud.
Yeah, maybe I'll kick off with the first question, then Alice will take it from there. I'm just, I've been reviewing projects on the waterfront in one capacity or another for, I don't know, a couple decades or more. It just makes me feel really good to see how you all approach this with such a high degree of quality and thoughtfulness that I think we're also seeing in other projects along the waterfront. And I think that's because I think developers like yourselves are realizing if you put great public amenities in, you're going to have a great project with higher market value and a more successful project. And all that's coming together, I think, in a really great way. I also pleased to see the way the building stepped down to the waterfront and how you've really approached the public realm in ways that enhance the views and funnel people to the water. That's exactly what we're hoping to achieve. But I want one question that I hope you can answer. I also like the fact that you haven't just made your buildings a high dry island and forsaken everything around it, but you're connecting it down to the water in a sort of graceful way. But beyond your boundary, just outside of buildings A and B, I think some of the land there is controlled by DCR, maybe others. What needs to happen and to make sure that that component of the plan actually gets implemented and then properly maintained over time? Are you guys going to be contributing some funds to that? Do you have an agreement with DCR? How does it all happen?
So great question. We've had several meetings with DCR staff, senior staff, about how we make these connections, how we make it seamless, as Cindy described, in every way. And what our proposal to them is that we invest our capital and everything that you see in green, near the water in Carson Beach, that provides both resiliency solutions and improvements, and we maintain it. So what that involves, Bud, is a license agreement that, so there's some legal work to be done there once we get past the approvals or, stage. So there's a lot of work to be done. We've opened the dialogue with them. And as Demo said, with Parks Department and the City of Boston, but everything you see in green there would be on our dime to improve and ultimately maintain.
Great, thank you very much.
All right, I had my Q&A box over the mute button. We've got a couple questions coming in. Please continue to send questions. The first couple are from Virginia. Her first question is about who are the people dealing with the landscaping? I don't know if that's specifically like reintroducing our landscape architects or talking about, more about the plant people who are involved.
Cindy, do you want to give a quick background on Olin?
Sure. Demo and I are from Olin. We are urban designers and landscape architects. We've been in practice for, 45 years now. We're located in Philadelphia and a smaller office in Los Angeles. I grew up in Worcester, Massachusetts, and my roots are very much in New England. And our work has been on very large public spaces, developments, and institutions. We are committed to creating a resilient public realm wherever we go. And I can go on and on as to who we are.
Anyway, why don't you give a couple of examples of some of your waterfront projects that you have such an amazing portfolio?
Sure. So I actually cut my teeth coming out of graduate school in Battery Park City, sort of the southern tip of Manhattan. And Demo and I just finished the Pier 26 project, which actually is just north of Battery Park City. We have done some work in the waterfront on the West Coast in San Francisco, both at Mission Bay and Rincon Park. These are some very notable public spaces, and we're presently working down in Alexandria. So I really think that the work that Demo and I did on Pier 26 is probably the most contemporary kind of thinking that is out there today with regard to creating resilient environments and environments that embrace public input and really create an opening, welcoming space for all. Other projects are, more inland. The Washington Monument is one notable project. Independence National Historic Park in Philadelphia is another notable project. We just completed the Apple campus out in Cupertino. So we've been around. Most of our work is national, although we do some international work.
Thanks, Cindy.
Thank you.
Sure.
A couple more technical questions from Virginia. One is, what proportion of native plants will be used, especially along the boardwalk, but even in green spaces in the interior? How do you balance native plants versus sort of what's going to survive in different areas? I added that last part.
So, Timo, do you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah, I would say all of it. We look at plant palettes in a very specific way. I mean, and I think it's, again, as Cindy said, a lot of like the latest thinking really. We're not looking to put things there that don't belong, but rather what is meant to be there and what is most appropriate. So native and indigenous species are at the core of that, and we look at them in terms of plant communities and how they interact with each other, because they do more than simply green or beautify a space. They actually have a function, right? They actually are host to habitat and also have greater capacity at collecting water. So there's multiple layers in how we view planting and how it operates specifically on waterfronts, because especially in an environment such as this, you really can't put, foreign or non-native species in these environments and then expect them to survive. They really, we don't want to put the money or even the resources or effort into trying to support something that's not meant to be there, but rather something that is appropriate and that is, again, resilient and long lasting.
Yeah, just to add, our Pier 26 project is really a celebration of the pre-settlement conditions of the Hudson River estuary. And we will be bringing that sensibility to this project, and the maintainability and survivability, and the ability of these plants to create a sense of place, that this is this place, it's not someplace else, is vitally important to, we think, to not just the operational success of a place, but really it's the experience of that place.
Wonderful. One more question about the plants specifically from Virginia. She notes that there's an alley of eastern red cedar along the Boston Teachers Union parking lot property, and spent days in April watching, she says, hundreds of cedar waxwings feeding. Is that something that your plan would preserve or not touch at all or change in some way?
I would have to say that we will, I love cedar waxwings. I think they are some of the most incredible birds, and when they flock through and migrate, they're phenomenal. This is a bit of information that I honestly didn't know before this question was asked, and we will certainly be considering that aspect of the project.
Great, thank you. All right, there seems to be questions now about the experience of the temperature. One person asks about, are there any concerns about the portal and the other fingers becoming wind tunnels between the buildings? With the water off the bay, how will that experience work?
So we can, Dick, did you want to take that?
No, wait, why don't you
Sure.
start, and then we'll
Sure.
Kirk and I will finish.
So we all know that this site is on the waterfront. That's sort of undeniable. And the yes, the wind does come off of the water, but it also, the winter winds primarily are northwest driven. So we actually see a fair amount of opportunity for interrupting those winds, which are the coldest winds that we're contending with here. We think that the portal, right now, of course, what you saw is really this sort of open barrel form that we showed for precedent work, but all of those wind considerations and temperature considerations will be developed in future phases of the design. The goal is to create spaces that people will be comfortable in year-round. I also think maybe, Dick, you want to talk a little bit about Building B, which is an important piece of that equation.
Yeah, Building B obviously is the closest to the water relative to its proximity to the bay itself. We're really excited about that as the opportunity to be an iconic piece of architecture. You know, potentially a timber building in terms of our carbon neutral goals. A lot of activation both at the ground floor and on the roof, and you know it'll be highly visible not only from the water and from South Boston, but also from the air. Right, as all these sites sit right underneath the flight path. And so one of the things, as Cindy said, in terms of the wind, we all experience the wind tunnels in Boston and the seaport, but a lot of those are I'll call it in narrow streets between buildings. And as Cindy said, the way we've tried to program this is to create those larger spaces going out the fingers into the water and help dissipate that. Kirk, do you want to comment any more on that?
No, I think, we imagine that maybe one of the most successful things about the Harbor Walk in the seaport area was the ICA building, and that Building B has the potential to be that kind of iconic draw with a public purpose and presence where programming takes place. And people want to be there. The other thing is the spaces between A and B and C, increase that open space and actually provide some shielded area contiguous to the DCR land along the Harbor Walk. So we're excited about increasing open space at the water's edge.
Great. Another similar question about experiencing those channels is, and this might be as much program as design, how are you ensuring that these spaces can be utilized year-round and not just in warmer and sunnier months?
Well, again, and you're right, Alice, it is about programming. We will have, we haven't fully thought this through in terms of, the spaces that could have, let's call it coverings and outdoor heaters and things like that we're seeing activation on. In this post-COVID world, we know that activating the spaces to allow for use in colder temperatures is going to be, highly welcomed, right? For whether it's restaurants or other uses. So we're thinking about that and how best we do it. In terms of some areas might be enclosed or covered, and some will be open, but with outdoor heaters and the like. So it's definitely on our mind in terms of how we program that to be, certainly useful in an active way, at least 9 months of the year and potentially year round.
And I think Demo showed an image in that path at Building C where there was an idea of a covered walk that could be conditioned right there on the lower left portion. Right. The other thing I'd say is that we're very conscious about the trip from the T to the C, and Building P up at the intersection of Mount Vernon and Morrissey, which we call the pivot, which because you pivot and make your way down the boardwalk, is another place that we're looking to have some winter garden type space, not unlike perhaps what's at the B of A Pavilion facing Post Office Square Park, because we know people need some respite on that 5 to 7 minute trip from the T all the way to the water's edge. So we're thinking very carefully about how that experience is good year round, but also that it has relief along the way.
Great. Great transition. Someone asked about the concept of the T to the C. It sounds great. How do you improve the connection from the T to the site and then to the waterfront and vice versa? What are some of the offsite improvements that you might support to achieve this connection?
Well, the biggest one is already in the works. The red line cars are being tested now that will increase capacity dramatically. And, you know, we are all aware of the challenges of the Red Line over the last couple of years through the winter, but that has led to the potential to reduce delays on the Red Lines by increasing that, you know, the capacity of the brain train. So that's the first thing. But I think we're also imagining that a lot of the wayfinding and imaging and promotion of this experience has to happen way before you get to the site. So whether it's on the trains, at the station, whether it's messaging of events, you know, the Dorchester Day Parade or the Caribbean Festival, and how we get that out into the you know, the diverse communities of Dorchester that we're so excited about bringing that flavor to our site. You know, we imagine that we're promoting what's happening at Dorchester Bay City throughout the whole city. So Dick, maybe you want to add something else.
Well, just two things. One, in other meetings, we've talked about you know, the engagement we're having now with city and state agencies on renovating JFK Station, you know, redoing Marcy Boulevard and K Circle. We've committed to completely redoing Mount Vernon Street, complete streets, all the way from the T down to the UMass entrance, which means a much better pedestrian experience as you exit JFK Station over to our site. As many of you who have done that know, it can be a hair-raising, you know, little 2-minute journey, a 3-minute journey. So we're committing funds to make that better, and hopefully the overall area will improve as well.
Wonderful. We have a few questions about sort of looking at the broader community. One question is about how the site plans to partner with the McCormick Middle School. How are you planning with these students in mind?
So as we've gotten to know the neighborhood and obviously you know, the public schools down there, there's some transitions going on down there with regard to activating their space with the potential Boys and Girls Club. That's a public process that's going on. So we've talked about engagement with students and high school students, which Kirk has been leading a program around the country on. And we see a great opportunity here relative to those high school students, kids from Harbor Point Apartments, BC High, to, you know, get activated with the project and this program, summertime program that Kirk can spend 2 minutes on referencing. And, you know, one of the great things about Columbia Point is you just have this wonderful set of institutional assets, starting with UMass Boston, JFK Library, Edward M. Kennedy Institute, and then the 2 public schools in BC High. And that's an unusual thing for a developer to land into, to have all these great educational institutions nearby.
Yeah, about 5 years ago, we started an educational program called Real Estate Exchange, focused on creating a pathway for high school students into the real estate industry, you know, a $9 trillion industry that is very exclusive of people of color. Dorchester is 78% people of color. So we're very conscious that BPS and Dorchester as a whole is a youth that we want to engage in both, you know, what we do, but also in city building. And we've partnered with Urban Land Institute around the urban plan curriculum, which some 6,000 kids have participated in nationally, to introduce the idea of creating civic places like this. So we, you know, we very much see our responsibility as creating the next generation of Dick and I as part of our legacy of this project.
Wonderful. There's a similar question, less about youth, but the question of discussions with the Harbor Point Community Task Force. How are those conversations going? How do the Harbor Point residents, how do you ensure that the Harbor Point residents are welcome there at your site? How does that closer relationship work?
Well, they're part of our core 4 group of the most immediate community organizations close in. They've been involved in every aspect of this project over the last couple of years, including convening 2 community charrettes that took place about a year and a half ago with several hundred people from the neighborhoods around the site. So Orlando has been very present, and we're very thankful for him to help lead those discussions. But physically, what I'd like to say is that, you know, we anticipate that as you look at that edge to the right of the plan there, that there are several intersections where we're very excited about connecting into the Harbor Point neighborhood. You know, their main green space is sort of further down, but there are tributaries and connections which will allow very welcoming access to this site. There are no fences, there are no boundaries. There will be a conscious effort to make sure the site is porous and that people can go anywhere on the site. I mean, anything that's not physically a building wall, even the spaces between the buildings, will be safe and secure and open to everyone.
Great. I'm going to loop back through a series of questions, things we've talked about a little bit, but it's the sort of the second set of questions on those topics. Someone asked about the plants again. The question is, how are you thinking about plants that might need to survive different temperatures as the planet gets warmer? So they're not, you know, maybe a Massachusetts native plant is expecting colder winters than we'd have. How do you guys, whether it's locally or in your national work, how are you guys thinking about temperature change?
So we're absolutely incorporating that into our thinking. We have a woman who is a landscape architect and has been with us for many years, who is our living systems specialist. And she is tracking all of the latest thinking on the migration of plants. So we would absolutely, she will very much be a part of this project when we get into that level of detail.
Great.
And I'll just add sort of a smaller point, I guess, really, on maybe not a smaller point, but that, you know, when we lay the foundations really for what these plantings are, like at the moment in time that we do, you know, there is this notion of adaptability with each one of these plant communities that we set forth. And it's also something that we are strongly encouraging and building into operations and management plans moving forward, so that there's a curated understanding of, you know, what's there and surviving today may need to evolve and change, you know, with the different climate dynamics that are going on. So there's always there's always a human element that we also need to include in this, which is very much a part of how we respond and maintain and take care of these landscapes as they evolve over time.
That's great. I think a question similar to that, the maintenance question, the long-termness, I'm assuming that the public spaces are permanently public and the places that you guys own will remain permanently private, though publicly accessible. But someone asks, will the public have forever access to the harbor walk out on the water and then the boardwalk through your site? Is there a place at which Dorchester Bay City takes responsibility for DCR land, or that the city takes responsibility for streets and spaces within the site?
So as we talked about earlier, our goal and discussion with DCR is the sites that are abutting us and directly in front of us, that we enter into a long-term license agreement with DCR that allows us to, you know, not only improve it and make it look seamless as we talked about, but also maintain it. So that, again, there's a sense of seamlessness associated with all that property. Our site is on a 99-year, the Bayside site will be on a 99-year ground lease with UMass. So I can't guarantee forever relative to the openness of all the spaces, but certainly, you know, that's our intent during the term of the ground lease, is that all of the public spaces we talked about remain open to the public, but are privately maintained.
I'm going to ask a really advocate-y question, knowing that there are some sites right in downtown Boston where they've viewed the Harbor Walk as a way to make extra money. Do you guys foresee having events out in that Harbor Walk area that would be a revenue source for you, or do you anticipate that your revenue is entirely derived sort of inland?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, we've more thought of that Harbor Walk area as just that, the Harbor Walk area. Any programming that we talked about would be on our site. So,
I
Yeah,
figured as
I think-
much, but this has come up in more tight spaces, and I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah, I think, we've envisioned that edge at sort of the where the intersection of us and the DCR land is to be a lot like the Wharf District in DC, where anyone can walk along the water's edge, but there's very passive activity happening. And then as you get to some of the more plaza type spaces near between A and B and C, there's a chance to program some of that space, but really totally open, porous, and more about activation and less about revenue generation, I think.
Someone asked, who is responsible for the climate adaptation and resilience of the Harbor Walk? So are you guys coordinating? I think you've already sort of answered this a little bit, so I want to try to reframe this question a little bit. Are you guys elevating it so that it stays dry, or are you taking on the efforts to ensure that it gets rebuilt or cleaned if it is flooded?
so
How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Demo, why don't you go, I think there's a slide early on that showed the coastline and the elevations. Excuse me. We haven't had specific questions about that, but what you can see from the plan is as the coastline without any protections, further protections start to come in that lower right corner, we clearly have built edges that could easily connect into the Harbor Walk off to Moakley and down south as the area floods. We have not talked to DCR about over the course of time how we program or shift the Harbor Walk itself. I'm sure that'll come out in discussions, but clearly it's something we've started to think about in terms of how we have created those hardscape edges that could, in 100 years be the Harbor Walk.
So you'll sort of slide up where the Harbor Walk is
Yeah,
identified.
I think that's the thinking, right? Without any other big solutions, we have to be prepared to be able to have a future condition where the Harbor Walk literally could be right outside our doors, right? Relative to the 2070 and even 2100 conditions as we look at these images.
Yeah. Another question, I think we're sort of moving back onto the site, but thinking about right now I'm going to read their whole question. They say, a lot of great ideas and diverse open space concepts and green spaces. With 70% of the site dedicated to life sciences and office, how do you plan to attract the public to your public spaces and not create a predominant and publicly perceived green spaces that feels like it's just for office tenants? So both, how do you bring people truly into your site?
Yeah, I think you want to do it, Dick?
Just two things, and then Kirk jump in. I think first, 1,470 residential units, does help create a sense of community that is, 24 hours as well as weekends, and then 155,000 square feet of ground floor activated retail, restaurants, civic spaces. Again, we hope will help create that sense of community beyond the workday spaces associated with the office and life science buildings.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that, clearly the whole site will be curated in a way that activities are happening there, not just during the week, but very much on the weekends. And because of the counter-cyclical nature of how people will use the site between weekends and during the week and evenings, we anticipate that this will very much be about inviting the community in during the times when the community has most free time beyond the work days, et cetera. So, it's not left to chance. We'll be very engaged in that and engaging our community partners in. And we do think the differentiator here is bringing the flavor of Dorchester, all the different cultures and ethnicities and specialness that makes it different every day of the week, every month of the year, that's important. That makes a place vital and not like any place else in the world you could be.
And again, knowing where we are with several thousand Harbor Point residents right next door, all the new residential that's coming, the 16,000 students and 5,000 faculty at UMass. I mean, there's a lot of people that get to the peninsula every day that we hope will want to come to Dorchester Bay City during the course of their day.
Great. Someone asks also about two spaces we haven't really talked about, the hotel and the teachers union sites. How did those affect your thinking?
Well, clearly the corporate properties are important neighbors to us. And so a lot of our planning needs to take those edges into account as well. And then same with the teachers union building. We've had discussions with them and continue to about how we might collaborate going forward and help the overall project. So more to come on that.
Great. Second to last question, I think, is where will this go back to transportation questions? Will there be a walkway from the T to the Pivot building? I believe there's a sidewalk there. I don't know if you guys have plans for improvements or you're working with others to make that better.
The complete streets, preliminary plan shows a much more enhanced sidewalk, pedestrian, bike, kind of connection experience over to that corner there at Santander, where the P building is. So yes, that it will be a much more enhanced experience. And then if we can get the improvements for both Morrissey and JFK Station going, we can further improve on that as well.
Great. All right, to wrap up, this is a note from Kathy. Dick and Kirk, you have been very involved in a robust series of public meetings with the BPDA. Thank you for the comprehensive thinking and level of conversation that you're encouraging. Can you talk about how your process and public engagement will unfold as you get into more and more detailed design of the project?
Sure, I'll start. So we've wrapped up about 7 community meetings, including 2 with the Citizens Advisory Council. Kathy is a part of that. Thank you, Kathy. And there's 27 members, and that CAC is actually set up to also deal with some of these improvements we've talked about relative to Marcy and K Circle and other developments. So what we expect next is we'll gather all the public comments from those first 6 or 7 meetings. The BPDA will have what's called a scoping session, which incorporates comments from all city and state agencies. And then, and Demo, maybe go to that timeline at the very beginning. Then we will create a draft DPIR to be submitted. The DPIR allows us to react to and address all those comments. And then that'll kick off another set of public meetings. We'll also be going through the BCDC process. That's already started. We've had 2 meetings with the BCDC, and that'll go through starting in January 2021 and go further into 21. So what we expect is to come back with revisions to the plan, revisions to all the things we talked about around affordable housing, et cetera, and have further engagement in a series of, I'm sure, public meetings like we've done in the fall, next spring and summer, to have more conversation. So, we've got a ways to go here.
Yeah, I would just add that, we're going to continue to do outreach to the immediate and other community-based organizations around Dorchester, because as we begin to get people ready to participate in the project, we want to make sure that we, one, let them know what's coming, but also arm them through our partnerships with the Eastern Bank's Business Equity Initiative and in partnership with other training and job opportunity partners to get ready so they can participate in that ground floor retail to create the second location for the faux shop in Fields Corner, or the Caribbean, purveyor over on Morton Street. And so, that takes time, and we've described that as the ramp. And it's important that we get out into the neighborhood and talk about that opportunity, and then give people the tools to participate in creating that character that we hope will be all of Dorchester coming here, as well as all of Boston. Thanks.
Great. If you're following along in the chat, I have put a link to the BPDA's website and specific to this process, so you can track the things that are on this timeline on their website. You can also see videos of past presentations that they've done for them. And this session is being recorded, so you can also rewatch this if you're super excited or you want to share it with someone else who wants to learn more about the project. I'm going to turn it back over to Bud to wrap us up.
Thanks, Alice. And thank you all for a very informative session and really great questions. I sent a note to the panelists and Joe at BPDA a minute ago, and I just want to sort of share my thinking. I tallied up a couple of weeks ago all of the projects that the city has proposed in its 5 neighborhood resilience plans, or 6 of them, I guess now. And there's probably 75 to 100 odd projects totaling a couple $2 billion. And if you multiply that, being conservative, by 2 to see what it really might cost us, we've got about $4 billion worth of resilience projects to do around the waterfront over the next couple of decades. And we desperately need the help of the private sector to chip in and make that happen. And I'm so delighted to sort of see that, that's the way you guys have approached this particular project. We'll do our best to hold you to that, because I think it's really important, but we really need your help. And, there are other areas along the waterfront that don't have these kind of projects, where there are big equity issues and so on, that are going to need other sources of funding. But in this case, it's really great to see what's happening here. So I'm going to conclude on that. And those of you on the Zoom call today can follow Boston Harbor Now work, signing up for regular emails at bostonharbornow.org. You can find us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We wish you a very happy holidays coming up. We want you to be safe, be well, wear a mask, and get the vaccine. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye
Thank
now.
you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.